Good evening, welcome in RNQ ECNO classes, block number 3, relations of being and beings. Unit 1, being and relation. 1.1 Introduction. Relations comes from the Latin word refer, which means bring back, the reference of one thing to another, mutual interdirectedness. It defines I think you're gone. Refer, which means bring back, the reference of one thing to another, mutual interdirectedness. It is defined as the bearing reference, respect, attitude, ordinations of one thing to something else. To be is to be related. Being is the being of beings. As being is the being of beings, it is always related to beings, and all beings are also simultaneously and radically related to being, hence relative to being, which is always the object and subject of knowledge. We can't think and speak. Knowledge, we can't think and speak of being without any knowledge of it. Both ontology and epistemology are inseparably related. They are two aspects of the same coin, which is metaphysics. Metaphysics is metaphysics of being and knowledge. Hence, metaphysics of relation presupposes both ontology of relations and epistemology of relations. 1.2 Ontology. Ontology of relation. Factors of relation. Every relation contains three factors: subject, term, and foundation. Subject, it is radical principles of the relations. It is that which is related to another. Example, I know him. Term is that to which the subject of the relations is referred or related. Example, I know him. Foundation is the approximate principles from which the relation springs. It is the origin or ground of the relation. Example, I know him. It is the basis, the ground, the reason why the subject is related to them. It is the bond which the units the subject and the term together and places them in relations to each other. Foundation is further distinguished into two: immediate and mediate. Immediate foundations is the foundation which is intrinsic to the subject of the relation. Example, I know him. Knowledge is intrinsic. Mediate foundations is the foundation which is extrinsic to the subject of the relation. Example, I have a pen. Positions of the pen, which is the foundations of the relations, is intrinsic to the subject. From this it is plain that one thing alone can never form a relation. Relation must exist between two or more things taken in reference to each other. The essence of relations consists in the essence and the being toward of one thing to another. It is the bearing, the reference, the attitude, the ordinations of one to another due to the some foundations which is the necessary conditions for a condition relations. But the relations itself, the foundation is present in both the subject and the term. Two white horses, for example, are similar to each other in that white color. Their whiteness is not a relation of their similarity, but only the reason of foundations of their relations by which they stand to each other in a relations of similarity. The relation therefore results from the presence of a common foundations in a subject and them and term, and is considered to be distinct from the foundation, the subject, and the term. Every category contains foundation substance contains the foundation of specific identity and diversity. Two flags of water, two sparrows, two humans, etc. The two members of each pair being compared together are identical in species. Each pair compared with another pair in this series in different in species. Here is the relations of specific identity among all the individuals of a certain species and the relations of specific diversity among the individuals of different species. Quantity contains of the foundations for the relations of quality, equality, and inequality. Things that have the same weight, size, volume, shape, or dimensions are equal, while things which differ from each other in the respects are unequal to globals of the same diameter have the relations of equality. Quality contains the foundations of similarity and dissimilarity. For example, we speak of two painters as being similar or dissimilar in their technique, of two philosophers as being similar or dissimilar in their opinions, or of two cats is as being similar or dissimilar in their behavior, action. The passion reaction contain the foundations of the relations of cause and combinations of sodium and chlorine is in relations to these two chemicals. Electricity, which produces light and heat, is related to them as effects to their cause. Time contains the foundations for property simultaneously and posteriority in successive durations. Place contains the foundations of the relations of distance, nearness, and relative positions. The moon is nearer to the earth than to the sun. Therefore, there is the relations of comparative nearness between the moon and the earth. The positions of north and south, east and west, or right and left, or before and behind, or up and down, and or one inside and outside, etc. Given rise and relations among objects, posture and habitus. Contains is foundations of the relations is similarity and dissimilarity between things, but in a different manner than the qualities. To be a prone or to be erect makes objects either similar or dissimilar. Thus, there is a relation with dissimilarity between the human lying down and another and the standing. So, two to be closed or two or not closed makes two persons either similar or dissimilar. From this, it is seen that every category contains items which may be the foundations for various sorts of relations between things. Kinds of relations can be grouped into two main classes: logical and real. Logical relations is the relations which exist only within the mind. It is the relations made solely by the mind and placed by the mind between entities. These entities may exist outside the mind or in the mind itself as concepts, judgments, and inferences. The foundations for such a relations is an ens rationis, a logical entity without any real foundations in the instrumental things themselves. The relations is strictly a product of the mind thinking. For instance, we systematic our ideas when we study a certain branch of knowledge, and in his manner bring them into relations with another. There exist logical relations of comparison and extension between every subject and predicate in a sentence, between the premises and conclusions of an inference, and between a number of inference in an existing argumentations. Such relations are logical as they exist solely in the mind and its operation. Similarly, there are also relations between objects outside the mind. Subject in which it inherits and by the foundations or ground upon which it rests, but the ultimate specifications comes from the term. For instance, a father of is ultimately denominated from a child, a grandfather from a grandchild. In every case, the term gives the final specification signs Since subject and term are at opposite ends of the relations, they may both be called it terms extremes. The subject is the term of Q from which the relations proceeds, and the term is that to which creator is real will that the creator to creator is only relations of reasons. Similarly, the relations of knower to thing known is real, but that of the thing known to the knower is a relations of reason. The foundations or ground of relations always remains. Will the relations may vary? Of, for instance, the ground would really remain in the sugar cube if very other sugar cube in the world had perished. The sugar cube, however, would no longer be similar in reality to any other. The real relations of similarity would have perished, while the ground would still really enjoy the absolute reality of the ground, and the relative reality of the relations accordingly can really coincide. From another standpoint, relations are mutual or non-mutual. Relations is non-mutual if its foundation is a real or logical in one of the extremes only. For example, the relations of knowledge between the knowing subject and the known object, in which the foundations of the relations is the real transitions from a state of non-knowledge to a state of knowledge with regard to same definite object. It is obvious, however, that only the extreme undergoes these transitions and change, namely the knowing subject which acquires the knowledge. The relations of knowledge is real only on the parts of knower. On the part of the known, it is only logical. Relations is mutual if its foundation is real or logical in both extremes. If two horses are white, the foundations of the relations of their similarity, namely white color, is present in both horses. When two poles have the length when two poles have a length of 10 feet, the foundations of their equality in length, namely their quantity is found in each pole, because each one is 10 feet long, independent of other. The relations therefore is mutual. A mutual relation is one of the same denominations or missions or systematical when the foundations in both extremes is the foundations of the same nature and degree. The whiteness of the forces, the common origin of children in the same family, the equal length of the poles are the same of the denominations, because the foundations is of the same nature. and degree in each. A mutual relations is of mixed denominations or symmetrical when the foundation present in both extremes is of a different nature or degree. This means a different of foundations in both, and consequently also different in relations of the one to the other. Many relations are of this kind. For example, that between parents and children, husband and wife, master and servant, physician and patient, lawyer and client, judge and criminal, teacher and student, pupil, senior, superior and subject, king and people, and so on. These examples for mutual relations pattern to all relations which are mutually present in both extremes, whatever of the same of a mixed denominations. They may also be purely logical, having a foundation which is conceptual or logical in both extremes. Thus all relations existing between concept judgments and inferences rest upon foundations which have no existence except in the mental order, since they are logical entities and such have no existence outside this mind. Such in the relations between subject and predicate in a sentence, or relations of grammatical constructions, etc. Formal logic is practically treatise on mutual logical relations. Relative and correlatives are simultaneous in nature. By this we mean the relative things preciously and formally as in relations to each other must exist at the same time. Thus mother and child are correlatives. Obviously the mother as a woman or human being exists before her child, but as a mother she must have a child, and she can't be a mother before she has a child. Correlatives are simultaneous in knowledge. This means that the knowledge of one extreme as relative always involves the knowledge of the other extreme as correlative, and in truth it's impossible to know what parent is without also knowing what offspring is. If we know that Antipater's Basilica in Rome is more beautiful than Bom Jesu Basilica in Goa. We must have some knowledge of the beauty of each correlatives can't each other. With this means that as the intelligibility of the one extreme is dependent on the intelligibility of the other, they can be understood only a reference to each other. This follows from the for, foregoing principle that the concept of offspring involves the concept of parent and one vice versa. The two figures are similar to each other in their triangularity implies that the understanding of the triangular shape of the one involves the understanding of the triangular shape of the other. Hence, no relative term as a relative can be understood without bringing the correlative term into the understanding, since they can be understood except in reference to each other. Absolute and relative. It has become almost complaints in recent philosophy to say that all things are only relative. The reason lies in the fact that anything, in order to be known, must enter into a relations with the mind, and as such must be related to mind. It is true that nothing can be thing can be known unless it enters into a relationship enters into relations with the mind, because knowledge in its very concept and instant essence implies such a relationship. But this only means that a thing, when known, has a relations to the mind, and that the knowledge of the thing is dependent on these relations. It does not however mean that the thing is dependent on the mind and its knowledge relation, so that the relativity of the thing would be dependent on our on knowing it. A thing must be real or absolute before it can become known, before it can become relative to our mind. All created beings are relative, for they are essentially and necessarily dependent on God, the first cause for their being, and its dependence is a form of relations. In the sense, only God is absolute, because God alone is without dependence on any other being. Characteristic beings are also related in many ways among themselves, are similar or dissimilar, equal or unequal, acting or acted or specifically identical or diverse. A thing is said to be relative when it is taken in reference or to something else. It is absolute when it is taken in itself and on its own account. Of relations always embrace the three factors: subject, term, and foundations, and the relations is conceived as something existing between the subject and the term due to their common foundations. The subject and the term must be distinct in entirety. No being is said to be related to its own self. It is always in reference to something else. Consequently, with the subject and the term must be something in itself and in oath and its own before each can have a reference to the other. For if they had no being or existence of their own, they could never have a reference to anything account, and that means to be absolute things therefore can't be relative unless they are. Is this not a contradiction in terms? Because certainly, if it were stated the something was absolute and and also relative from the same standpoint and in the same respect, a contradictions would be involved in the statement. A thing, however, can very well be relative from one standpoint and absolute from another, and then there is no contradictions considered in themselves. All things have a reality of their own independent, but to have a being and existence of its own means to be something in itself and know and on its own of the being and existence of the other things, and hence from this standpoint they are absolute compared. However, with other things they are either similar or dissimilar, equal or unequal, etc. And viewed from this standpoint, they are relative as a matter of fact. They can be relative to others only because they are absolute in themselves. Hence, the knowledge of things as relative presupposes the knowledge of them as absolute. We must always know the terms of our relations before we know the relations itself. Consequently, the knowledge of the absolute is prior to the knowledge of the relative. We may summarize the doctrine of relations in the following sentences. Not all relations are logical in character. Some relations are real in nature. The entirety of the relations is really identical with the entirety of the foundations in the extremes, with a virtual distinctions between them. Knowledge of the absolute is necessary before knowledge of the relative is possible. 1.3 Epistemology of relations. Many of the Indian philosophers understand or interpret relations as both ontological and epistemological without making any clear demarcations between them. For them, relations is essentially non-monistic in its connotations, and therefore it necessarily presupposes a dualistic or pluralistic conceptual framework or relations imply two or more distinct factors: anuyogi adjunct and pratyogi subjunct. Relations is many of five kinds: samayogi conjunctions, vibhaga disjunction, prathakatva separateness, samakhya number, and samavaya inherence. Samayoga is a relation between two independently existing things that they can be in and out of relations without their essential nature being affected. It is a separable, terminable, and repeatable relations. Vivaga inheres in pairs of individuals which have just parted from contact with each other. Pratyahaka is a quality which resides in pairs of separate substances. Samakhya refers to numbers higher than one. Samavaya is a relations between two or more inseparably existing objects. It is a relations of being in or inhering in, like the cloth inhering in the threads or color in the threads in the Buddhist traditions. All relations are regarded as mental construction without objective existence. Relations are only hypostatized as external and superimposed upon the reals which are impermanent or momentary particulars. They are discrete, unrelated, and superimpositions Upadhi. Relations is an interpretations of reality rather than reality itself. Most of the Western philosophy traditions make a clear distinction between subject and the object. In the act of knowledge, they would interpret knowledge as a relations between two beings, the know and the knower. Through these relations, the knowing subject knower opens in oneself to the world. One who knows lives oneself and turns to the surrounding world. However, in knowledge one returns to oneself as the known being. Penetrates into the subject in some way since knowledge takes place not outside but inside the subject. The knowledge is the result of a natural process of human knowledge is the result of the following process: the physical stimuli proceeding from the things activate external senses arousing a nerve impulse which travels along the nerve fibers for respective centers of all the cortex as sensations are color around flavor over pain warmth etc. In this way the sensation subject is determined in its sensory response partly by its own vital nature and partly by the character of the informing stimuli sensation is thus to be the product of a double factor. One is objective, the physical stimuli issuing from the external thing, and the other subjective, the vital response of the subject of particular. Hi, done? You are done? You are done? No? गुस्सा कर रही है अरे मैंने ये ना
अरे यार नेक्स्ट करती हूँ ना थैंक यू फॉर यूज मच देखिए पर टुमारो ड्रीम ओके इसमें कि तेरा जॉब आ रहा है पढ़ाई का आर्ट्स नहीं है चाहे तो फ्री रहे चाहे जॉब का सिंपल रूल है
अभी एक दिन चल रहा है ना
669 सीसीटीवी कैमरा जॉब आर्ट्स में ये नहीं चलता भाई का फोन चला तो अपना रिस्क क्यों ले रही है तो अभी आज थैंक यू वेरी मच आई एम सो सॉरी
हो गया तेरा हो गया
मेरा तो होगा उसने मेरे को बता दिया तो खुद
कटिंग चालू हो गया आज मैं पढ़ना स्टार्ट करूँगी stimuli with the particular kids of sensation the result is the cognitive image of the image of the object.
तो 230 क्यों लेती है? At least
Phantasm
40
or
rupees
sense
तो देने।
image the बाद में बताती हूँ. The
मेरे लिए
phantasm
बात
is the total sensory impressions of the completed. Yes, definitely, sure. Cognitional image of the thing furnishing the stimuli which arouse the sensations. The phantasm is the unitype bond between the sensory subject and the thing, making the thing know in a sensory manner. Universals are derived from the sense image through abstraction. Sense image represents both the similarities and the differences of the individual things. The human intellect has two aspects: agent intellect and passive intellect. The active or agent intellect operates on transition and draws out the senses of the individual thing applicable to all the members of the same class. Then the passive intellect, potentially intellect, receives the abstracted essence, impressed intangible spaces, and makes an intellectual representations things express intangible spaces, namely universal idea. Direct universal idea considers only the essence and not the applicability of all the members of the same class. Various reflex universal compares the idea expressed intangible spaces with the individual of the same class, affirming the denying that is judgment. The universality is the product of the mind having its foundation in things themselves. Knowledge in the sense is the presence of the known in the knower, the presence of the object to the subject. Knowledge as the presence of the object to the subject. In knowledge, an object makes itself present to the subject. To the known reproduces itself in the knower. Example: when the color blue is known, the blue of the thing penetrates into the subject. This process takes place in materially real thing remains unchanged. The mystery of knowledge is that the object, insofar as it is known, does not act as a body and the subject. The object exists in the subject in a new way, which is not a material mode of being but an immaterial one. This does not necessarily mean spiritual and intentional is so far as such an objective presence always refers to the material thing, for we can't observe the international presence of color in a subject as the blue color in a flame is observed. The international presence is an unobserved, universal, and absolutely private act. Knowledge and positions of the known by the knower. Knowledge is a possession of the known on the part of the knower. There is a certain union of the
क्या वॉशरूम मैं भी वही करने आई पर दोनों दीजिए क्या देखना ये भी
नहीं खाली
जाके आ
certain union of object with the subject. This union, however, does not cancel the difference between the knower and the known. There would be no knowledge without this union. This union is not transferred into another thing. The knower grasps the known as it is. The conformity between the known as it is present in the knower and the real known is truth. What changes is made of being of the known being. There is a material mode of being in the being insofar as it exists outside the subject, and an immaterial mode insofar as it exists internationally in the subject. The real object in the what it international presences multiplies if accordingly to the number of knowing subjects. Knowledge and international assimilations. In the act of knowing, the knower is the known. In science, the knower assimilates the known. Assimilations make something similar and appropriates if the knower appropriates the known, such as appropriations is the deepest root of knowledge. It satisfies the requirements of the absolute idealism. However, absolute idealism exaggerates the identity of the subject as such, and the object which results in a cognitive monism without any distinctions between beings. Cognitive assimilations take place in the material sphere and thus maintains intact the distinction between the knower and the known. This is no real in transformations of the object. On the contrary, the knowing subject is transforming by the object which acts on the subject. Knowledge are the actualizations of the intentional spaces. The spaces is an The species is an act of the faculty of knowledge is an ontological situations of the cognitive salt which is soul is enriched by the intrinsic principle which has the functions of producing the knowledge in act, that is the operations of knowledge. The species is not that which is known for the in such a case knowledge would always be self-knowledge, but that by which the real thing is unknown. The spaces through which knowledge is made possible is not innate, since they proceed from things through a physical activity. Only angels known by infused spaces. This is what rationalism claims for man. Knowledge has need of the spatial science of finite and created intelligence is not the measure of things. God knows the created beings in his supreme essence, which is identical with his existence without any species.
সকাল থেকে একটা
However,
কলও নাই, মেসেজও নাই, কিছু নাই, কিন্তু অন্য লোকের সঙ্গে ভালো কথা বলতে পারে ও। আরে সে আমি দেখি ঠিক বুঝতে পারছো না, ওকে তোমার গল্প মারাস না।
not everything is known by man through the species, but only the object of immediate knowledge. God is known in an analogical way from the ideas of the directly known things and not through species. Knowledge as the appropriations of the being of a thing. A thing is known by that which is to known means to process a being internationally. Knowledge is always relative to the mode of being. It does not mean that knowledge it existing of or to being. It is also made of being. Hence, knowledge is also knowable through reflection. Since knowledge refers to being, we can conclude that a thing is also knowable insofar as it is in the measure in which it is the reasons for the knowability of something. It is content of being. That which is not knowable. I can know only that which is being as the formal object of knowledge. The formal object of knowledge is being, that is insofar as it possesses being as an act. It being as the formal object of being, then it is a necessary content in the comprehension of every object. The first thing that falls under the scope of knowledge is being, since the comprehension of a being implies comprehension of the character of being. Our knowledge is always the knowledge of something is being. The notions of being is not innate but the result of experience in which human notices being as soon as known intellectually. Anything that is the object of some comprehension is first grasped. Separations entice under the aspect of being. The fact that the formal object of knowledge is being does not mean that human has a perfect notions of everything. Cognitive progress is made through a growing reflections, of course. Explicit and systematic reflections on being is the task of metaphysics, just as scientific knowledge of light is the task of optics and not of the common human, who however sees everything in virtue of light.